It's Kat here with a live stream of the Mom's Adventure Paradox podcast. And I'm really excited to have a very, very special guest with me here today. Cathy Heller, if it were not for you, I am not sure I would have a podcast right now. I'm so glad you're here. How are you doing today, and where in the world are you?
I'm so happy to be with you. You have such a force of energy inside of you. It's always fun to see you and to watch you spinning energy into new worlds as you kind of move with such passion through the world. It's beautiful, so beautiful. I'm in Los Angeles. You and I were just talking before we started this broadcast about how bumpy it's been. And it's also for those of us who, really sort of open up to the invitation of the spiritual work we're all doing. There's always a both and so it's been both really so heartbreaking to just see the devastation that's happened in Los Angeles and this beautiful earth, and the people who've just lost so much. And while that's happening, there's also this incredible connection of purpose and heart opening and giving, and a way in which the city has never loved its way through life, and nothing like this before. So I think there's always a lot that's happening for us to sort of, it's an invitation, right? It's an initiation. And I saw that the first night of the fire, we were evacuated for 10 days. And the fire the first night came as close as 4 doors down from us. And so that first night was really a traumatic moment. And there were so many incredible lessons, because the first lesson was how it feels in my body when I have to literally be in fight or flight, which you realize, oh, I actually never am, right? This is that. Those other things are not. That's an illusion. This is that. And then how capable we are of showing up and rising to those moments, and also how dysregulating it is in the nervous system. And also, when you have a minute to leave your house, I thought it was fascinating that when I asked myself, what do I want to take? I wanted my humans, right? And actually nothing else. Not one thing, nothing was the answer. I didn't pack anything. The only thing I grabbed besides my children and the cats was the antibiotic that my cat needed. I ran to the fridge to get it, and I was like, okay, it's very clarifying that you work to create a life that has purpose, and then along the way you also create material things, and you build structures, and you build piles of things, and then you go, oh, they mean zero to me, which is so interesting. When it comes down to it, it's nothing. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. And then the next lesson was that there were two more. The next lesson was that as we drove away from the fire, literally, I didn't know where we were going to go. So I was really in the unknown, which is very much what the spiritual practice is all about. Because in the mind, we want certainty, and in the heart, because there is always equanimity, we live in infinite possibility. And so all of a sudden I start calling hotels, and they're already full because people had been evacuating all day. And it's 8:15 now at night. And then a friend of mine says, why don't you just get down here? And I'm thinking to myself, am I really going to be up for receiving this much of a kindness? Because there's 3 kids, there's 4 cats, there's a lot of, what on earth? And I decided I'm just going to let her, I'm going to do it. And it was really uncomfortable. And I did it anyway. And we drove the 3 hours south. And then the next beautiful lesson, because we got there in the dark, when we woke up in the morning and there were roosters and chickens, and my daughter goes, Mom, can we go outside to the farm? And we literally go be in the earth. And I'm looking out over the horizon, and I'm thinking about, with tears streaming down my face, how we have these moments in our life where we realize we're holding on so tightly to something when there was a whole different paradigm that was available to us. And so we spent a week, because the National Guard was literally surrounding our area. We couldn't even come back if we wanted. It was not an option. So over 10 days not being home, we found home in friendship. We found home in the earth, and we were gardening and riding horses. And I was like, it's so obvious what the gift is. It's obvious what the problem is and how painful it is. But then there's this other thing that's really obvious, which is how much of a blessing it is to all of a sudden do question, what is it that you've decided is your life in its totality, and what else is available, and how many other ways could you be living more alive? And so we come back to LA and we're like, the air is bad. My daughter has asthma. She's not able to go to school. And I'm like, I think we're being asked to be on the earth more, take care of the earth more. And so we have a property we've been building in Florida, and we can grow our own food, and kids can ride horses. And I'm like, okay, so we're saying goodbye to this one avatar, this identity I built my whole adult life. And now it's like, that gets to be burned to the ground so that there's like a softened sort of underlying soul that gets to come through. That's maybe not as much inside of this sort of iteration of me. So I think that that is just wild and gorgeous and liberating. And my word for the year was liberation.
Oh,
I had no idea. It was like, everything you've known is no longer going to be your reality, but what a gift it is, right?
yeah.
When you
Yeah.
realize you can be non-attached to everything in your external experience, because what is always the richest part of you and the abundance of you is you connected to the divine, connected to the mystical, ready to be nimble, surfing like the wave, just fully in the flow of the river rather than holding on so tightly that you break.
Oh
So
my gosh. I
there's a
love
lot of
that
gifts in
so
it.
much. Oh, so many gifts right there. And I was thinking, so apropos. I was looking at your book and I was reading actually your meditation this morning where you talked about this world is actually immaterial and your experience in
Yeah,
Jerusalem and like the depth of kindness and your rabbi saying, the kindest thing, the most spiritual thing you could do today is to go and wash the widow's dishes.
right.
And like
Yeah,
we can make it so complicated. And I think for folks who don't know you, just to make sure, I'm going to read this from the very back, just this sentence, because it's so great. In your new book, Abundant Ever After, which we're going to be talking a lot about today, but it says about the author, Cathy Heller is an incredible spiritual teacher. That should be capital I, by the way. Incredible spiritual teacher and coach who specializes in helping women create wealth and next level happiness. She is host of the Abundant Ever After podcast and author of Don't Keep Your Day Job, the book. I want to talk a little bit about your first book. Because the experience of this second book, and I had a similar experience when I wrote my book, and I've been working and studying your work for 2.5 years now. And this book, like I had talked about writing it, and it was the experience of, I'm pregnant with a book baby, and we're going to birth this thing, right? And I heard you say the same thing, Cathy. Will you talk about the experience of writing your first book and then the experience of writing Abundant Ever After?
I mean, yeah, first of all, it's so cool how we continue to find more treasure in our experience, in who we are, and what's available for us to give to the world. Like, it's just this never ending through the looking glass, like awesome ride. And so at the time that I wrote my first book, like that was the thing that I wanted to say. At the time I wrote that book, I felt that the opposite of depression or yeah, it wasn't happiness, but it was a sense of purpose. And I felt so strongly that people understood that they had these gifts that were collecting dust on a shelf inside their soul. And I wanted people to know that they were overqualified to share those gifts, and that God, in the infinite wisdom of the divine consciousness, would never give you a life that would be meh. The meh emoji is not assigned to you, and that you were born with a gift, that the way you show up in a certain way, whether you're a good listener or you're a good matchmaker or you're good at blowing glass or you're good at baking, there is a quality that you have that is a calling. And I felt like it was a mandate on your soul for you to live into the potential that it is possible that you could have a job that doesn't feel like work, and that it's an assignment. Because I thought to myself, if the opposite of depression is purpose, and all day long, instead of phoning in some job people don't like, they did the thing that lights their soul on fire, then people would be in purpose and they would be happy and they'd be making money doing things that make them happy. So that was the message at the moment. And then over time, I felt like the next message that was coming through was, what does it even mean to answer the question, who am I and why am I here? And when you go beneath that, it's like, what is yourself with the capital S? And if everybody really wants abundance, and as Wayne Dyer says, if we don't get what we want, but we always get what we are, then the fact that people didn't realize that they are abundance itself was what was keeping them from having the experience of abundance. And I was like, well, I want to show people the truth of the soul, which is the reason that you are born to be abundant ever after, the reason that you are born, that it's your birthright to live in a state of abundance, is because we didn't come to the world for a pile of things. We have way bigger dreams and aspirations. We're way deeper than that. We don't want a car. We want so much more than that. And what we want is to feel ourselves in flow state. We want to feel the inner beingness of our own inner peace. We want to feel the spiritual authority and sovereignty when we are whole. And that is available. It's always a breath away. It's in really identifying who we are. And as my rabbi, who you just talked about before, says, we're each a master, we're a masterpiece, a piece of the master. And we're each someone because we're some of the one. And God is infinite, which means there's nowhere God isn't. And so therefore we live, as Einstein says, in this infinite field. And each one of us is a wave in this ocean. And so we're all connected to each other and connected to the ocean, which is abundance. And so when you start realizing that everything is vibrational and you are a frequency, then you're going to get more turned on by being the ultimate resonant frequency that you could be, which will turn other people's radios on. And then every second of your life, just getting to be you, tapped in and turned on is the turn on. You're feeling the wholeness, you're feeling the excitement, you're feeling the creativity, which means whoever you meet, they'll literally, their biology will get an upgrade being around you. You'll have creative ideas. You'll be loving other people into life. You'll be living your life's purpose. And then because that is such an abundant experience, because you're so tuned to abundance, you will be creating abundance in every way, on every level, whether it's financially, spiritually, it just is what you will, it's just what you will be 3D printing. And so that became what the message was of this book. And like you said, that I had that experience of being pregnant with the idea. And then I also had the experience of peeling back the onion, where I would start writing it 3 years ago. And I would be like, okay, wait, I didn't say it all the way. I said it a little bit. And then eventually I realized that Rick Rubin said that when people create things, they often say nothing at first because they're scared. So what they will create, he's a music producer, of course. He said, usually the thing they will create, the artist will create the sum total of everything that they've heard so that they're not rejected. And eventually Picasso, if you go back and Google early Picasso, it takes decades before you start to see him do anything other than copy everyone else. And then he starts creating what you now and I know is a Picasso, right? So I realized that I needed to really not be filtered and just say what it is and how I say what I want to say. And one of my friends, she was talking to me about human design, and she said, you're a manifester, that's your human design. And she said, manifestors are meant to be polarizing. And so instead of worrying if you're going to be too woo or some people won't get what you're saying, just go all in, because that is your job. It's to clear a path. And when you think about people who say things, it's not like anything is different. The tale is always as old as time, but it's when you fully say what you're meant to say, it will seem different because you, in your full coherent, passionate, the way you're meant to say it will always be different. And so eventually I rewrote the book until it finally felt close, really, really close to as close as I could get it to be what I really want to say. And that's when I knew, oh, I've just sort of left behind down the road that part of me that was afraid of my Simon & Schuster, my publisher, saying, this is too spiritual. In the end, the more I just didn't apologize and just said it the way I wanted to say it, they actually loved it. And I also said to my team in July, as we were preparing for the book release in December, I said, just so you know, I'm allergic to the idea of grasping for bestseller lists. I'm already feeling so complete that I did the thing that I need to do, and the outcome is doing the thing. So that's it, we're done. And then of course, that is the way you manifest. And so we did hit the USA Today bestseller list, and I didn't even check that day. It didn't even cross my mind. I didn't even know until I saw that there was a missed phone call from my publisher. And then I was like, oh, I was so not aware, because to me, the satisfaction was having really crossed that ocean to
Mm,
speak honestly. And it felt so good to do the assignment of what I knew was the calling to do. So
mm.
it's been really fun to see that people do love it. And now it's in the airports, and I saw it and I signed a bunch at LAX, and that's a blast.
Love it. Love it. Love it so much. I have one of the pre-released
Oh yeah.
copies that came from your summit in November, and I gotta tell you, I've been studying with you for a long time, but to have it in a book where you can go back and you've got it dog-eared and
Yeah.
you can take people to places. And then I think the other thing that is just so powerful that I heard you say over and over just now is how I wanted to say it, how I wanted to say it, how I wanted to say it. And for me, working with and studying you, so much of what I've learned, Cathy, is that I need to hear myself. Like I need to hear myself say it again and again and again until you get to your own Picasso. And you might not be there yet, right? You might not be there. You've shared this story multiple times, and I'm pretty sure it's in your book. But when the
Yeah.
string is played, the other guitars resonate with that. And my experience of working with you is that I resonate. Like when I'm hanging out
Yeah.
with you and I hear you
Yeah.
sharing your wisdom and saying, podcast, podcast, now is the time. And I was working with a client yesterday and I was telling him, when you're podcasting, it's like the spokes on the wheel. So there's you, and then every single person that you talk to, that becomes your voice getting stronger and stronger. And I always go back
Oh,
to
I love that.
Luther. Isn't that beautiful? But Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream. We all know he didn't write that speech, but there's a part of the story that people forget, which is that Mahalia Jackson was in the
Yeah.
audience and
Love that
she yelled
moment.
out, Martin, tell him about the dream. And that is when he went off book and he really started to say it, to really say it. And I
Oh,
was looking
thanks,
back,
Sean.
I mean, my notes from when I first started working with you, you talk about a podcast being like a living book. Because the thing about a book is like we do the work, it's like a child, it has a
Yeah.
birth date, and then it exists and it may be reproduced later or reprinted, but a podcast keeps going and that message keeps coming through. Have you had any breakthroughs or perspective on your podcast and your book? And I know you rebranded your podcast Abundant Ever After. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, so 5 years in, we've done the podcast now for 8 years, and 5 years in, which is 3 years ago, uh, I knew that I wanted to make a pivot with the branding, with the message, instead of calling it "Don't Keep Your Day Job," which was, even though it was all about purpose, don't have a day job, do your life's work. That's really about purpose. It was also, considered an entrepreneur podcast,
Mm,
which is fine, but I wanted to really go deep into sort of the self-actualization route, which is what I was after from the beginning, but I wanted to clarify that. And so at first, for a year, we just called it the Cathy Heller podcast until we could kind of find our next place to arrive at. And then 2 years ago, we called it Abundant Ever After, which is how I knew I would call the book that as well. And that feels really good that now there's a very clear message. And I do think that it's a fun and also difficult sometimes journey. And sometimes the difficulty of the journey is what makes it fun. But to really get clear, what is your message,
mm,
right? I think that we have so many voices coming toward us and so much feedback that we sometimes think we have 5 messages or 3 messages. And we do, but there's usually one thing that a violin does better than a piano. Like there's usually one thing that a cello is meant to do, right? And so if you think about people like Eckhart Tolle, somebody would walk away and say, I think that his thing is like the moment, being present, even though since he has some wisdom, he could probably talk about lots of things and he does, that's his thing, or Brene Brown definitely talks about a lot of things, but we know that vulnerability is really her lane. And so I think at some point it really occurred to me that making the spiritual feel real for people is my thing. Like I'm
Mm.
just good at talking to anyone, no matter what language you speak. If you're analytical, if you're this, if you're that, if you're from the Midwest, if you're from the Northeast, it's like I can somehow distill down concepts that might have before seemed like prickly, or you didn't quite find your way into those conversations. All of a sudden, it feels very accessible. It feels like love. It feels like ease. It feels like it's you. That is my thing. So I think my team really likes the fact that now the podcast and the book really mirror one another. And then we also built this membership called This Abundant Life Now, which really is a great place to kind of do the implementation of what we talk about in the podcast and the book. And that was a journey. And if you think about it, it's like there are just so many moments in our life where we, whether we are aware of it or not, are holding ourselves back. We're the ones keeping ourselves from being fully free because there's a reason we don't just go all in on who we actually are. We're afraid that will be too much for people. We're afraid that we'll outgrow our relationships. We're afraid that we're going to alienate people, whatever the reasons are. And so I do feel like there was a real learning to love myself and learning to find even more integrity and people please less that let me go into this alignment. And so now it does feel really good that they're all very much connected and congruent.
Oh my gosh. Love all of that so much. And, branding, of course, having it all match and all of that too.
Yeah.
But I noticed because I have this pre-released paperback copy and then I have your hard copy, one title you changed, and I think talking about what was going on the summer before the book was released with your healing journey with your
Oh
dad.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
his essay at the end originally is called Ocean, and then in the version that most people are going to have, it's called Lessons from the Jetty. Would you just speak on that and share more with us about your relationship with your dad? And I'm
Yeah, of course.
deepest condolences. This.
Oh, no, of course. Thank you. Yeah. So first of all, just the specific of that is that the publisher called it like the ocean or something, but really he had titled it Lessons from the Jetty. So when we went to finish the book, we made sure that it was like the title he had given it. That was the only reason there. But the beauty of adding it to the book is really such a special moment because my dad and I, like most fathers and daughters, have their own bumps in the road, and it depends on the relationship. Some have more, some have less. But when I was growing up and my whole journey, and I feel like we're still having a relationship, we're just having a different relationship now where he's, in non-physical form. And I think anyone who's lost a parent totally feels that, by the way. Like now I feel like he's like my superhero with
Mm.
superpowers, literally, that like is like guiding me and moving these around. Gonna give you a really good example of that in 1 minute. So growing up, my dad was still really kind of figuring out how to find his own alignment. And he's deaf, and he came out of a family where he was an only child, and there was a tremendous amount of physical abuse and emotional abuse. He even had sexual abuse. And so then he eventually like stumbles his way through, grade school and high school with all of that going on, being deaf, going through all this abuse, all of that really intense stuff. He had actually tried to run away from home multiple times, but because he's deaf, he could only get as far as like the subway, and then he would turn around because it's very scary for a deaf person, especially a deaf child. So ultimately, when he married my mom, they meeting in high school and having never really looked at their own self-development, they weren't going to show up with a lot of tools. And so they had a marriage that was extremely hard and unfulfilling and stressful. And I witnessed that until their marriage really blew up, and he was having affairs and he was drinking, and it was very dysfunctional. And then my mom really lost her complete sense of self and was very suicidal and was spent two different times in mental facility care, and that actually didn't help at all. And So my childhood was a lot of that, which in the end, looking back, it really turned to wisdom because it gave me such a setup to really seek answers and purpose. And there's so much beauty in that. But um, my dad wound up leaving and marrying this woman, and he really wasn't in my life for a long time. And the time he was in my life prior to that wasn't really a wonderful experience. So I didn't really start my relationship with him again until I was in my 20s. And even then, it was stressful. And he was learning how to show up more as he wanted to, and I could tell, but I was still having to level set based upon who I knew him to be for the first 20 years. And I was really such a people pleaser as a survival skill. So even though he was ready to have a real relationship, I was sort of stuck in wanting to just be a very superficial version of myself. And maybe also as a protection, not to go too deep.
Mm.
Then in 2020, during the COVID pandemic, we moved from LA for 2 years to Florida, where both my parents live, my dad and my stepmom and my mom. And it wound up being another blessing because we were then both older and both wiser. And we had these 2 years to spend and have a string of great moments, just a string of them. And then I knew about 3 months before he died, not that he was going to die in 3 months, but that he was dying. And I knew that it was time to be extremely honest. And I went to him in April, he died in July. And we had this extremely powerful conversation where I literally did not think I'd be able to do it up until the morning that I went and talked to him and just came clean and said, here's all the things that I've been carrying around. I didn't think I would have the strength. And eventually I went to see him and he said, of course, tell me anything. And I thought I would like say one of the things that I had carried my whole life. And instead, he was so grateful to have the intimacy of that conversation that he said, please don't stop talking. And I stayed there for 4 hours and we had this beautiful connection and it really freed me. And then when he passed in July, I spent time with him in hospice. And what was really powerful is that he had gone into his sort of transitioning into death. He hadn't opened his eyes for a few days, hadn't eaten, hadn't drank. He was in hospice on morphine, eyes shut. I got there 2 days later on a flight and I started singing to him, talking to him. And about 4 hours into that, he opened his eyes, sat up, started talking, and he was with me, speaking, talking, hanging out with me, having the most tender connection for the next day and a half. And that was such a medicine. It was so healing. It was such absolute love both ways that it was like magic. And I thought to myself, how come this isn't how we spend time with everyone we love all the time? Just like so present, so open, no guards, just love, just presence. So that was beautiful. And then while we were in the hospice room, I saw this essay that he wrote about going to the ocean every day and about asking God for the strength to be prepared for whatever the day held ahead of him, and that the waves were always the constant that let you know that no matter what you would go through, that ocean is there every morning and the sun rises, and it's a prediction that there will be a sunrise and that it will always follow you and that you do have this resilience. And it was such a beautiful essay. And he talked about the pelicans coming to get their daily sustenance and how stunning the world is and how beautiful it all is and how it shows and teaches the lessons of resilience. So we were literally finishing the book that week, like we were closing pens down on the book that week. And I said to my publisher, don't you think that that's uncanny that he's dying? And can you put this in the back of the book? And so they said, with pleasure. And it really feels like such a blessing that went into the book.
Mm. Wow. I remember you did a podcast right around this time. I remember listening to it. I was at the gym working out and I was like bawling because, and you shared about, I believe, a miscarriage in one of your podcasts too, one of your
Yeah.
earlier podcasts, and how intimate the space of podcasting is, which is a conversation. you know? And so I'm right there with you as you're talking about being there with your dad. And he says, keep talking, right? Like I'm so moved by that story and so grateful that you shared it with us and that you shared it on the podcast and then again today. And I know you said you're feeling him more and more with you, like recent.
Yeah, you're such a good listener. So here's what's crazy is, and you just said it before we officially started today, but so my dad passed away in July, and um, for whatever the reason, over the last 4 or 5 years, even before the pandemic was definitely a questioning. I think a lot of people started asking, where do I really want to live? Like, do I want to live more in nature, this and that? Anyway, I started asking that question, I think a year before the pandemic, because I think many of us are really good at being achievers. And then just because you can ski a black diamond doesn't mean that it's good for you to do every day. And when you have a high capacity to tolerate doing hard things, you tend to be addicted to pressure. So for me, having a busy life in LA actually felt very normal for my nervous system. With all the things I went through as a kid, I just replaced that kind of, scary stuff. This wasn't scary, it was just a tremendous amount of pressure. And then that pressure kind of felt like equal. And as I started to get healthier as a human, I realized, oh, I can choose out of this pressure. My husband and I flipped roles 8 years ago. I'm the breadwinner. He doesn't even work. Why am I taking on all of this? And why the traffic? And why the intensity? And why the hosting everybody's events? I do that too in LA. Like I host everything for everyone. And it's like, as beautiful as that is, there's a lot that goes into being the person who is always available to hold so much, which is what I did as a child, right? I was holding way too much than I could really actually handle. So my dad passed away in July, and it was so interesting because he had said to me, I really wish I could leave you guys my house, which was a little condo right on the beach. And in the end, it didn't work out. And my stepmom couldn't afford to keep it. And so she needed to cash it out to go provide for her own sake and this and that. And then it was really uncanny because we had been thinking about Florida, but we could not find the right place. And we had written offers in other places in LA, more in the kind of countryside, a little further out from the city, but never, even when we would come up in price, never get the right offer. It never would match. So my dad dies in July. And then sure enough, right around September, I see a house that is in Florida. My husband sends me the link to the house as I literally just sent it to him. We jinx each other in our text. And he's like, did you see this? I go, did you see it? He goes, oh my God, I just sent that to you. So I said to him, I wonder if we should buy this house. And at the time, this just a few months ago, I thought, but my kids are in school here. And is it really the right thing? And I said, you know what? Let's just write a lower offer, because if it's meant to be, it'll just like sail through. And if not, we won't push too hard. We'll let God decide. So I write the offer on the house. And I hear back from the realtor the same day. And the realtor said, the owner has another offer that's higher, except that your last name is Heller, which is my dad's last name, because I don't have my husband's last name. And the seller is also Heller. And because of that, they know it's your house. And I thought, isn't it interesting that the last conversation I had with my dad is he wished that he could leave me this home. And now, not only are we getting the house, but we're getting it for $400,000 less than they were asking. And we're going to use that money now to fix up the house and make it this like beautiful thing. So when you go to the door of the house, it says like the Heller home on it, right? Because like that's who lived there and they're the only other owners. And then it turns out that the woman who lived there, whose last name was Heller, her first name is Liat, which turns out she's Israeli, which I wouldn't have known that. Her name is Hebrew, and Liat in Hebrew means it is for me. So I go, okay, so your name is it is for me, Heller. That's like crazy. My last name is Heller. That's weird. And then she and I connected, and we have the same birthday.
What?
And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? So I think that that's a sign. I don't know. I think that's nuts, right?
So many signs. I
I've
mean,
had
how
a lot of
many signs
those,
do you
but
need?
So then we we come, to this point where there's a fire in LA, and get this, we closed escrow on that house in November. And then we right away started to fix it up because we didn't think we needed it right away and this and that. We'll move in the summer or whatever. So November 6th or 7th, they start redoing everything, gutting the kitchen, gutting the bathrooms, putting in new floors, putting in, all this stuff. Beautiful. And we were there over Christmas break, and, they're making progress and this and that. And then the fires happen, and we realize we really need a place. We really do. And then we say, when is the place going to be done? Right? Because it's almost February 1st at this point. And they estimate, the guy writes back and says, I think by February 26th, which is my dad's birthday.
Oh my gosh. We're getting
The house
chills.
is 3 weeks away from being done. And I said, it can't be more clear than that, that is so I really do think that the people who leave this world, who love us the most, don't leave, and they watch over and they protect and they move chess pieces around because in their infinite love for you. A last thing I'll say is I heard Wayne Dyer talking on a video, of course, to Abraham Hicks. And he said to her, why is it that my dad passed away? And he said, I had such a hard relationship with him. And one day I drove out to his gravesite and cried my eyes out.
Mhm.
I just totally forgave him and da da da. And he goes, and then that year, my book became a bestseller. And she said, because when your dad transitioned from the physical world into pure positive light, he could do what he actually really was meant to do, that he wanted to do in being your
Mm.
father. And you, by forgiving him, opened up the vessel, the channel to receive, right? Now that connection is just on both sides. It's so clean. So of course, you're going to have this extra superpower. And I just really feel like that's true.
Oh, so true. You're taking me back to last February, actually right around this time that my grandfather passed. And the day he passed, we knew it was coming. He was, in his early 90s. We knew he was coming, but I thought we had a little more time. And you always want to go have that goodbye, right? But I went out skiing and I was wearing a onesie. And I got on the chairlift with this guy, and he said to me, he said, "There's a lot of material there for humor." And that whole chairlift ride up, we all just were sharing bad jokes. And my grandfather and I would always swap jokes. And so then that night when I got the call, they really think, he's got the death rattle and it's happening now. I realized you were with me today, grandfather, in Jackson Hole on that chairlift with a lot of material. You know, like
Feel that.
right there, those moments, that cosmic
Right.
connection, right? And something else that comes up in the book and also your teachings is dream bigger, dream bigger, and almost like all the way to that other side, right? Of what we cannot see or know, like really into that spiritual plane. I love the meditation where you take us into a warehouse and we start really seeing all these things that we desire. And a lot of them are material, but a lot of them are in that feeling, right? Like really feeling that
That's
feeling,
it. What
you know?
you're really seeking is the feeling. We often write it down on paper or say it out loud or tell Santa Claus, I want this Range Rover, I want this beach house, I want this relationship. And really, you want it because of how you believe it will make you feel. So once you get that you could feel that way right now, you could feel that abundance, that wholeness, that exhilaration, that freedom, that authenticity right now. And that is your job. That
Yeah,
is what you are here to learn to do. That is when you no longer need it to happen, but that is when it will happen, because that is when you are the vibrational match for what that actually represents.
mhm,
And so that becomes really fun to ask yourself what you want and then know what the feeling is behind it and then give yourself back to that feeling. And you just keep manifesting more and more, because then you're in total non-attachment. You didn't need it anyway because you've got the sponsored feeling of what you wanted, which is what you were after.
totally. Another exercise that you have in the book that I've done with you, and most folks have probably done some variation, is the if when.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. It's so exhausting. It's like, if I lose the weight, then I'll be happy. If my husband, stops drinking, then I'll be happy. If this, it's like, no, like that's definitely not it, because that is so disempowering, right? That is making a case that you cannot feel better until
Mm.
things that are outside of your control happen, which is a complete opposite of how things happen.
Mhm.
I watched this reel the other day that my best friend sent to me, and it was this guy in prison, and he's all lit up talking about his spiritual awakening. I don't know if you saw it, it was like a viral thing. And he's got dreadlocks and he's got this shine in his face. He's just like so found himself. And he's telling this story about how he got to prison for drug trafficking. And he's there a couple years, and something happens within him where he said he got to a place where he finally felt free. Like, here he is in prison, but he finally felt free. He was free from his addiction. He was free from all the stories in his head, and he felt his heart, and he felt at peace.
Mm.
And no less than a day after this big feeling came over him, they walk into his jail cell and say, "You're free to go." Meanwhile, he had like back-to-back sentences that had not yet been fulfilled. And he said, "What do you mean?" And the guy says, "Listen, you were put here because there was a certain amount of kilos of heroin or whatever, and then you get a certain amount of time. We decided to reopen your case, and they tested the drugs, and it turned out that most of it was actually fake. So the amount that was actually real, you served your time for. So you're free to go."
Wow.
And the real was him telling this true story and saying, "Of course, because I freed myself fully." So then, of course, it moved the external world and it matched.
Mm.
I'm just like, when will we realize that it's all a hologram? And inside of us, what feels like an ocean to cross is actually a millimeter. And it's the moving into alignment,
Mm.
wholeness, and equanimity and courage. And when that happens, you're just so unhooked from needing anything to happen. And then it all happens.
Totally. It's and it doesn't have to take all this time. It's 20 seconds of courage. It's a 90-second meditation. It's take a bath. That was actually
Yeah.
when I had my babies and I was really feeling they're both under 2 and we've got a bunch of horses and cats and dogs and big farmer taking care. I felt so depleted and overwhelmed. And I was working with a coach at the time, and she said, "Can we come up with one thing you could do where you're not taking care of anybody else while you do it?" And you know what that one thing was, Kath? It was a bath.
Mhm.
And I realized my grandmother, and you have so much wisdom from your grandmother, speaking of those who love us on the other side who are working with us, right? My grandmother is still with us by the grace of God, but she would always talk about her bath. And when they built their home, they built this beautiful bathtub. And her bath time, sacred time. You are not interrupting grandmother during the bath.
Great. That's such a
Sacred time.
great, like unique, special gift that you have even absorbed that at all. And I had the same thing happen where I started talking to a particular coach, and she's like, "You should not only take a bath, but put crystal, like rose quartz, like in the bath and submerge and really like allow yourself to fully fill up. Like, create a sanctuary of space and time for yourself." And even just saying those words out loud again, like, when was the last time we considered creating a sanctuary of time for ourselves every day where it's like, this is the next 15 minutes. I'm going to light a candle, get a cup of tea, get out my prayer journal, or close my eyes, or put my feet in the grass, or take a bath. And like, in this time, there is no one I have to be for.
Mm.
There is nothing I have to do other than be. And how often does that even occur? And so I do think that, every time I've done any kind of coaching or therapy or EMDR or acupuncture or Reiki or you name it, silent meditation retreats, there's always these nuggets that you like take away. And I think I totally agree with you that there has to be some practice, like some actual practice where you every day show up for the practice. It's not just here in your head, but you're doing something to like embody what you're trying to connect head and heart. And I think that that is a good one, taking a bath.
So good. And I can't believe we've been talking almost an hour, having so much fun. But I'm thinking about the paradoxes, and it's so interesting. 1922 was the year that we had more cars than horses on most major streets around the world. So what happened at that time when we no longer had to connect with an animal who's connected to nature, who's connected to the environment, to the temperatures? Now we just turn it. Later we have windshield wipers. You're gonna go through the snow, But like, what are we passing through? And it's part of why I love so much the story of the rooster. And I love that you have to evacuate LA and you end up on a farm.
Crazy, I know. And then there's a
You can't
rooster.
make this stuff up. Will
You
you
can't make
tell
that up.
us the story of the rooster?
Yeah,
Like
the rooster.
practice.
I know. It's just there's so many beautiful gifts, especially in traditions that are so old that have spanned time immemorial. And so when I was first studying in Jerusalem, there was a prayer that I thought was rather peculiar because there was in the morning blessings in the Jewish prayer book, one of the morning prayers is to ask God to make you like a rooster. And I remember when I first saw it, that just definitely jumped out at me. And so I had to ask, what is this about? And eventually the best explanation I got was from a Holocaust survivor who's since passed away. What a blessing of a person. Her name was Esther Youngray. She was Hungarian. And she said that the idea is that, first of all, her father, when she was 5 years old and she was in the concentration camp, she remembered her father saying, "Be like a rooster, Esther." And the story she tells, which I think really is such a beautiful way of sharing, and then I'll share what I believe she shared with me is what the prayer means in its essence. So she's in the concentration camp, and then thank God, she winds up getting freed, right, after years. And then she moves to the States. She's living in New York City. And because she had this really beautiful heart, and once a week she used to speak to about 1,000 people on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. She was just such an incredibly gifted speaker and storyteller. She became a little bit well known. And during the presidency of George W. Bush, he was invited to Jerusalem to a Holocaust memorial service. And he invited her, and she went with him on Air Force One. And when they were flying back on Air Force One from Jerusalem back to the States, he woke her up and told her to look outside the window, and she did. And he said, "Do you know where you are?" And she said she didn't. And he said, "Well, you're flying over Germany." And I just couldn't miss the moment to share with you that. And she said, "Oh my goodness, I just now," she said, I just realized what the rooster prayer is." And he said, "What's that?" And she said, "There's a prayer that my father used to say, be like a rooster." And she said, "You see, the rooster is the first one on the farm, the very first one on the farm. Just when the night can't get any darker, that split second when it can't get any darker and it turns to daybreak, the rooster crows right before the light breaks, because the rooster says, wake up. The dawn is here. And that the darkness is not the end of the story, it's the beginning. The light is the end of the story." And so she said, there I was, right there, where she could see out the window, freezing cold, having lost so many members of her family, watching the gas coming out of the gas chambers, 1.5 million children like her murdered. 6 million Jews murdered, 11 total million people of all kinds. And she said, little would I know that one day I'd be flying from Jerusalem to the United States on Air Force One. And she said, except that the rooster knew that. And that is who I was asked to be. And that is who I became. So of course, because she said I did ask to be like a rooster every day in that camp, and I would stand at the chain link fence. And even though it was so hard to do it, I still said that prayer. And I ended the book with that story because when you whittle it all down, that is our job every day. My grandmother used to say, it is so easy to see the bad. You have to look for the good, and you will always find it. And no matter what we're going through, if it's the LA fires, if it's the horrendous, scary plane crash that happened last night, which we all saw, if it's anything that's happening in your own lives, if it's, I mean, there's just no end to the contrast. And also, there's no end to the amount of light. And we all know sometimes when things are the darkest, it's because you've been assigned the role of being the light.
Mm.
And in the darkest nights, one little candle shines so much brighter than it does in the middle of the summer, right?
Yeah.
On the brightest days of the year. So that is the mandate, is like to be the rooster. And, you know, I'm so glad you asked that question. And it's such a beautiful reminder for everybody and myself every time I say it, be the rooster.
And I think, just a moment to pause for all those who lost their homes, lost their livelihood, lost so
Yeah,
much
so
in
recent,
LA
it's like
fire,
2 weeks
so
ago.
recent.
Thousands of homes, thousands of people's memories, people who didn't even have fire insurance. I mean, it's though I've read, I believe this is correct, that it was the biggest US fire in history.
Yeah.
Really significant loss. And not just in terms of the structures, but I think this gorgeous earth
Mm.
we were entrusted with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the amount of asbestos that's been released into this beautiful ocean, like
Mm.
there is a lot to really grieve, and then to maybe hopefully use it as an invitation to say, what are we going to do to double down on loving the earth now? What are we going to do to double down on prioritizing what actually matters, which is this friendship? And even though we're doing this because of a fire, which is unfortunate, how do we sustain this when the times are good? How do
Yeah.
we build the community in LA, not in a tragedy, but in a time where everything is actually okay? So I think there's a lot to be learned, and hopefully the good parts of what's come out of it will be taken with us.
Totally.
Yeah.
This is a bit of a segue, but I wanted to share this. You shared this long ago.
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh. So for our listeners who can't see it, it's sort of a, black and white sienna image of a child and a mother. And it says, if your wounded mom's higher self could speak to your conscious self, this is what the mom would say. I'm not going to heal and wake up to my truth in this lifetime, but you will. You have all the codes to make it all happen for your soul. And then you'll raise the frequency for the collective. This is what you do, Cathy. Like you raise the frequency. I mean, looking at all of these little podcast babies, we're like
I
coming
know.
under your wings, And
That
it's
is such an incredibly generous thing to say. And that quote, which I posted from whoever posted it, I think I tagged her. I think her Instagram is like at the loving guide or something like that.
Mhm.
But and that is just such a profound thing. Like you have the codes. I saw recently somebody said, like, you are the answer to your ancestors' prayers.
Yeah.
Like they went through everything. You're the hope. Like that is amazing. You know, think about all of us. If
Mhm.
you're here, what people had to do so that you could be here. How many people had to make choices and sacrifices and decisions for us to be here through the test of time?
Totally. Oh, and I feel like we can make it again so complicated, right? But just coming
Yeah.
back down to the ABCs of Cathy Heller. Um, and one of my favorite interviews you did was with Matthew McConaughey, where you were like, "Oh my God, you're so hot. Oh my God, you're so hot.
I
Oh my
know,
God,
it's
you're so hot."
insane.
I was
Not
thinking,
normal at all.
knowing I was talking to you today, I was thinking, I love you so much. I love you so much. You've changed my life. You've changed my life. Like, can I? Okay, okay,
That's
and
so cute.
okay, let's have
That
the
is so
interview.
cute.
But and I did actually go through all the ABCs, so I'll post them for fun. But I was thinking the ABCs of Cathy Heller would be abundant,
Hmm.
boldly, and create, because
I
we
love that.
came here to
Great.
create. So thank you for playing your instruments. I love your music, by the way. I know you haven't been singing that much, except for you were riffing in the kitchen, I saw, doing a little karaoke, and just the healing of music and using our voice and sharing our stories and connecting. And, I really believe so much of my work is connecting to the animals and connecting people to their animals and then to the earth and to our essential nature. And so much of it comes through what it is we're saying, but we just don't take the time to even hear ourselves. So, thank you.
That is so beautiful. I love that you are so tuned into that. And I love that you bring people back to that. There's so much in relating to nature that calls us forward and shows us a mirror and heals us at the same time. So I love that you're drawn to that. Oh, it's so rooting
Totally.
and grounding and nourishing.
And I'm rooting for you to get a rooster in Florida, just so you know.
Oh, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, can I make that happen?
Do
I
it.
was thinking the same thing.
Let's do it. Well, anything I can do to help. I know lots of people with roosters, so
I love that. I love that.
we got a rooster circle. All right. I love you so much, Cathy Heller. For those who have never heard of you before, can you just tell us where you want people to find you, your website, your links, follow? We'll have it all in the show
Yeah.
notes, but
Be a part of whatever feels good to you. You can listen to the podcast, which is called Abundant Ever After, or the book, which is called Abundant Ever After. Of course, you can come to my Instagram, which is just at Cathy.Heller. And I think that any of those places, there'll be something that you can feel like feeds your soul. And hopefully you'll just feel like you walk through your day a little bit more like you. So yeah, come
totally.
enjoy, be a part of
Oh,
my world.
thank you. And I'm rooting for you on this next chapter of your adventure home.
Thank you. I love that.
For me, home is where the horses are. My kids too, but you got to have horses. That's where you know you're home. So, home is where the roosters are. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you for this practice. Thank you
Thank
for this
you.
time.
Gorgeous.
Have a beautiful day, Facebook.